Hey guys, Fallen here. Today we are looking into the Greek favor system. Now coming from AoE to Greeks have by far been the easiest pantheon for me to pick up. Their resource collection, unit type, just unique units all around, it has felt very intuitive. And this kind of also extends to the favor generation, which is a new mechanic as opposed to AoE 2. But you send some wills to pray at the temple, and that gains you favor with the gods, and that's shown up as a resource. Now, while the mechanic itself for this is simple, the actual calculation behind is not very straightforward because of diminishing returns. So, it can be very difficult to get a feel while you're in the game as to how many villagers you should put at the temple. And the result is that for the first villager on temple, you're getting 6 favor per minute. The rate decreases rapidly, and when you have 10 villagers on a temple, you're only getting half as much efficiency out of the villagers, about 3.2 favor per minute per villager. So, to better understand this, we'll be looking into a few things. First, just how the gather rate varies as you add more villagers, and if we can take up some general assumption that'll help us when we are playing a game. Second, if there are any nuances, any tips and tricks about these. And third, how many villagers we need to keep constant production at a temple. And with these points in mind, let's get to the video. To start with, let's look into something very trivial, which is the Greek villagers pray at the temple in two ways. First is by bowing down, and second you see them standing up and then sitting down. One seems more intensive form of praying than the other. However, this is purely cosmetic and it does not have any difference to the rate at which they are generating favor. Next point definitely has an impact, however it's very minor, and that is if you task a group of villagers to pray at a temple but they have not reached there yet, it will still reduce the favor collection rate of villagers that are already praying. And an easy way to avoid this is by making a house near the temple and shift queuing your villagers to the temple once they reach there. So in the far distance that they are traveling, there is no reduction in collection rate for the villagers already at the temple praying. Now, looking at the actual collection rates, as you can see, the efficiency reduction in favor generation is actually very steep. At 1 villager, you're getting 6 favor per minute. At 5 villager, you're only getting 4.4, again, more than 25% reduction in the collection rate. And once you have 10 villagers, the efficiency is way lower, it's about 50%. Normally, I would say just stop at 10 villagers on your temple. However, most Greek myth units need at least 20 favor per minute. So it's actually ideal to have at least 16 in classical age at least, so that you can have 2 myth units per minute from a temple. Anything beyond 20 seems like a waste to me. 20 is still valuable because I think for centaurs you need 22 per unit. However, anything above 20 villagers is a waste because again at 27 villagers it's 70% reduction in efficiency, and you're better off just putting villagers on other resources and making some other units as a buffer. Now, getting into a little bit nitty-gritties of how this might be working out in the back end, and please feel free to skip to the next timestamp if this is not something you care about. Looking at the data, I felt like it might be a logarithmic scale, and when I set trendline for that, it does seem to fit. However, it might also be because we are talking about a small range. Now, what I also try to look at is the rate of change of the collection rate, and it looks like that is starting to cap out at around 1. So we start at around 6 per minute, and I think at some point we're just going to be capped at 1 per minute, no matter how many villagers we add. So if you're adding 80 villagers, you're going to get about 80 favor per minute, which I feel is to restrict people from just mass spamming myth units and trying to power their way through a game. Now, going to Zeus, of course you have a 20% boost as a civ bonus in favor generation, and the graph just seems to have moved up. This has interesting consequences though, as your cutoffs are now with fewer villagers, so you're more incentivized to make myth units, and of course that goes with other bonuses that Zeus has. Now, looking at the exact data for Zeus, there's something very surprising here. Instead of 16 villagers needed to reach 41 or 40 plus favor collection rate, you only need 11, which means you're saving 5 villagers, and you can use those on some other resource. So the 20% favor rate bonus is actually a 31% saving on villager time, and that's a more significant impact. Again, if you're going to do same strategies with Zeus, Hades, or Poseidon, Zeus is miles ahead in an efficient way to do that same strategy. Now, there is a very core concept when you're playing any RTS game, especially in Age of Empires, that if you make a building, you want to make 100% use of that building. So if you're making a temple, you want to keep queues at 100% of the time. If you're making a barrack, you want to queue your hoplites 100% of the time, or so on. So you want to distribute your villagers to resources to make that possible. With that in mind, let's look at how many villagers we will need to put on a temple if we want to keep constant unit production for myth units specifically. Now, on average, you'll be able to produce 2 to 3 myth units per minute from a temple, and the favor generation is capped so that you really wouldn't need more than 2 temples to make myth units. Okay, so in this section, let's just overview the data we are looking at. We are going through all 3 Greek gods. We are checking how much favor is needed per unit and also per minute, and correspondingly how many villagers we should be putting on temple so that we can keep up a constant queue in a temple, or at least have 2 units per minute being produced. Now, looking at one of my favorites first, the Minotaur, and you can see that you need about 45 favor per minute to keep a constant unit production, and that turns out for Zeus you need 14 villagers, which is not a lot. However, for Hades you need 22 villagers to do the same thing. Next we have Centaur, and they cost 14 favor per unit. However, they are not created in 20 seconds as a lot of other myth units. They are created in 22 seconds. So on when you try to calculate per minute costs, it comes to be about 33, and this is not very high. So I would always recommend just having the exact number of villagers on temple that is needed to keep the constant production going. So for Zeus, that's just 8 villagers, and for Poseidon, that's just 11 villagers. Cyclops are very tanky myth units, and you don't always have to make a constant queue of them. You can make 1 or 2 every minute just to add to your army, and those extra 25 villagers that you're saving will provide ample of DPS in terms of other units. Coming to Manticore, they are actually very expensive, so if you want to have a constant queue of them, you will need about 88 favor per minute, and this in a game sense is very unachievable. So what I would recommend is going for 1 or 2 per minute, and then if you're at 2 per minute. With Zeus, it's very easy. You only need 18 villagers instead of 80. Now, Nemean lions are very strong units, especially when you use them in combination of other units. And if you make 2 of them, it's actually very affordable. With both Hades and Poseidon, you only need 21 villagers on a temple to be able to afford 2. And I would recommend somewhere between 2 to 4 Nemean lions masked up before you engage. So you want to manually activate their stun, and if you can chain it, you will have a very good fight against anyone. The Hydra is of course one of the most popular units, very tanky for a heroic age unit, and it reflects in the cost. 28 favor per unit is very high, and if you try to calculate how many villagers are needed, it seems quite impossible, at least if you go for Hydra with Poseidon. It's better used with Zeus, and in that case it's just 24 villagers to produce 2 Hydra per minute. Next we have the Colossus. This of course I think is the costliest unit apart from a Titan, and of course they have a equivalent amount of HP and a lot of durability, and the cost definitely shows that. And in this case even Zeus struggles to have enough villagers to keep a constant production. And what I would recommend is in a very late game, once you have all the upgrades, you go for 2 of these per minute. Cost of Chimera is also very similar to a Colossus, which makes sense because it's also a Mythic Age unit. Instead of tankiness here, you get a lot of AoE damage, and it's trained a bit faster than Colossus as well. So it's definitely not possible to keep a constant production. Even 2 units per minute seems very costly. So just plan ahead if you want to go for Chimera in Mythic Age and put villagers early to temple. The next are the 2 water units that Greek pantheon has. First one is Scylla. Again, the cost is very high because they don't just have a high favor cost, but also they are created very fast. So you end up with 80 favor being needed per minute, and this is again very high for any civilization to keep constant production. If you just want to mix them in, let's say you want to make 2 per unit, 2 units per minute, you just put 11 villagers for Zeus and 16 for Hades and keep on adding them into your mix. And Scylla, once they have a few heads, they're very strong, so definitely keep them in mind when you're playing on a water map with Greek. And the last one of course is Carcinos. Carcinos are trained very fast, so with a moderate cost of 15 favor per minute, it actually ends up being the highest cost per minute myth unit, and there is no way you are going to be making it at a constant pace because the favor cost is too high. If you just want to again mix in a few of them to tank against the normal ships, you are looking at around 7 villagers for Zeus and 9 for the other 2 major gods. Last but not least, we have god powers, and of course in the Retold edition you can reuse all the god powers. However, reusability comes at a favor cost, which increases after every use. First we have Bolt, and definitely Bolt seemed a bit costly at first use before. However, in the latest patch its cost has been reduced to 55 for the second cast, and now you only need 9 villagers to be able to cast it again. And of course subsequent costs will increase by 5 at every recast, so you'll need to add a few more villagers to make sure that it's available by the next cooldown. And while Sentinel is cheaper, Hades doesn't have the 20% bonus that Zeus has, so you actually spend 11 villagers if you want to get it available by the next cooldown for a second town center. Lyre is the cheapest Greek god power, and while its impact is very high in early game and it drops down in late game, case can be made that you will be able to cast it in classical age and heroic age for that extra food boost. Since its cooldown is so low, it skews that you need 9 villagers per cooldown, but in fact if you put 3 villagers on temple, in every 2 minutes you'll be able to get another Lyre. Restoration is a great in combat ability to use, and it can greatly shift the match to your favor. With Zeus you need 11 villagers, with Hades you'll need 16 if you want to have it ready by the cooldown. Pestilence has a low cost and a high cooldown, due to which the number of villagers you need to put on temple is relatively low. For those that might have missed it, they were buffed a little bit in the damage that it does to units, so definitely keeping in mind and testing, because again, the recastability of this god power is very high due to low cost, and it can definitely help, especially when you're fighting in opponent space. Ceasefire is another one of those techs that are good situationally, otherwise they are not very useful and you have to know when to time it. However, once you have used it, the cost of getting it back is not so high. It's 75 favor, and since the cooldown is about 4 minutes, you can just put 4 or 5 villagers and you will have enough favor to be used again. Bronze is another one of those active god powers that you want before you take a big engagement, and in that sense it should be difficult to get to, which you can see in the cost. It's 150 favor per recast, and it increases by 10 every time you cast it. And with Zeus it's actually very achievable with just 29 villagers needed, but with Poseidon you have to pay a big price. Curse from Aphrodite is another one of those very strong god powers. It has been nerfed a little bit in the previous patches and it's not as OP as before. However, it's still a great god power to swing a fight in your favor. With both Hades and Poseidon, you'll need 30 villagers to make sure you have enough favor by the cooldown. Okay, so the last heroic age god power is Underworld, and this is by Apollo. It's very costly at 200 favor, and then each subsequent recast adds 25 to that. This is very costly. Cooldown is very high at 3 minutes, so you have to be very careful how you plan and use this. Maybe you can think of it as something you will not use at every cooldown, but something that should be game ending. So after a second cast, I don't think you're getting there. With Zeus, 43 villagers, kind of manageable. With Hades, you'll need 6 to 7 villagers on temple for 3 minutes to be able to recast this. Next we have Plenty, which is kind of like a feitoria if you know the Portuguese unique building in Age of Empires 2. The cost is very high, however you get an infinite amount of food, wood and gold, so that's great. The recast at 200 favor, maybe the first time with Zeus you will manage, and the same as Underworld. I don't think with Hades and Poseidon you'll ever reach a point where you'll be able to recast this again. Final two, first we have Lightning Storm from Hera, and this is again super high recast, 350 favor. Again, Lightning Storm is supposed to be a game ending god power with such a massive AoE damage that it does. And Zeus kind of is able to make his way to a second recast if he puts almost all of his economy to getting favor. And Earthquake from Artemis is the same, very high AoE damage. This time, instead of unit damage, this time building damage is higher. and the cost is same, 350 favor to recast this. It's not going to be easy to be able to gather enough favor to get to recast it. Okay, so that was a lot of data, and I hope some of it will help you think about those breakpoints when you're playing your next game with the Greek pantheon. What I would recommend anyone playing the Greek pantheon is to plan ahead for your favor costs, because it's very costly to gather it in short term, because the more villagers you add, the less return you get. Also, the Zeus 20% favor bonus, it's crazy good. You're meeting your cutoffs early, and those villagers that you save can be used to for something else. Instead of 16 for Hades and Poseidon to get 40 favor per minute, you can just spend 11, and that's 5 extra villagers Zeus has available if you're going to make the same myth units. Same if you're looking for something that costs 50, and in that case you're saving close to 10 villagers time. If you like the format of this video, or if you have any feedback, please leave them in the comments below, and if you have any suggestions, kindly do that as well. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.